Hey guys, welcome back. Let's dig out the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships, otherwise agency disclosure form in simplest terms. What I want you to know and what I want you to catch is that this is a fairly simple form that goes through and simply explains what agency is, how it works, what we do, what we don't do essentially, and then breaks into the point of what a seller's agent is, what a buyer's agent is, what dual agency is, and what a transaction coordinator is. What I'm going to ask you guys to take a look at right now, a little bit simpler, write down this, if you will, but just think O-L-D-C-A-R, one letter under the other. What I've found typically is coming out of pre-licensed training and even experienced agents, when I ask, what are your fiduciary duties? What is it that you owe to your principal, to your client, to your buyer or your seller whom you represent? What are your fiduciary duties? Because we need to understand those to understand what agency really is and what we do in representing buyers and sellers. So with you having those written down, O-L-D-C-A-R, and I'll add a D at the end, old card. O is obedience. Obedience. L, loyalty. Loyalty. D is disclosure. C, confidentiality. A, accountability. The R, reasonable care. And I said I'm going to add a D at the end for the old card. And the reason being is reasonable care kind of makes sense, but I think most people understand due diligence even better. So when you think due diligence, that addresses reasonable care and due diligence. Now, those are what you owe when you represent a seller, when you are, as it puts it here, a seller's agent. It covers what you owe when you are a buyer's agent. So I don't think I need to address either one of those, but guys, it's spelled out on the agency disclosure what it is that you do. Now, it also then explains what a dual agent is. Now, I want to cover this very quickly. Because we are a designated agency, and I'll address that in full, the only time that you're going to become a dual agent is when you personally represent the buyer and a seller within the same transaction. Buyer, seller, same transaction. That's it. Other than that, you will not be a dual agent. We'll coordinate a couple other things so that you fully understand. But let's address then first what a transaction coordinator is. Because I know that there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what a transaction coordinator is. So let's break this down and read what it says. A transaction coordinator is a licensee. First misunderstanding. A lot of folks think that a transaction coordinator is not a licensed individual. Oh, no. When we talk about a transaction coordinator with agency, transaction coordinator is a licensee. But as it continues on, who is not acting as an agent of either the seller or the buyer. They don't represent either party, either one of them. But let's keep going. Yet is providing services to complete a real estate transaction. Now I'm going, well, wait a minute. So what's the difference? What's the difference between this designated agent or a buyer's agent, or for that matter, a seller's agent? What's the difference? Now, I'm posing that question to you, and I hope you're actually giving some deliberation to that. Because to me right now, it sounds like they're the same thing. But yet, we'll reread it. Transaction coordinator is a licensee who is not acting as an agent of either the seller or the buyer, yet is providing service to complete a real estate transaction. Everything sounds the same, except for that they're not an agent of. Yet, the transaction coordinator is not an agent for either party and therefore owes no fiduciary duty to either party. So it sounds like to me, the fiduciary duties is all that's lacking. Yet, they're still going to do all the things that a real estate agent would do outside of the representation, those duties owed to a buyer or seller whom is represented. Now, if you're an experienced agent, I want you to think about that, because you might be the one who's fighting this thought. But I'd ask you, is it not potential for an agent who's a transaction coordinator to sit down with a buyer, perform a search, show them homes, put together a purchase agreement? I'm going to say, I won't use the term negotiate, but let's call it use their diligence to be able to put together and working with the listing agent to help this buyer formulate a purchase agreement. Would they not put that on paperwork? Would they not be running around to make sure all the signatures done? Would they not go to getting an inspection done? Would they not be present for the inspection? Let's see, matter of fact, might they show up for an appraisal? Would they not work with the mortgage company, the title company, to get to the point to where we have a buyer-seller sitting down at a closing table signing docs to where a seller ends up with a big paycheck and the buyer ends up with a wonderful home? So somebody tell me what's different about a transaction coordinator, because those sound like they're doing all the things in regards to providing the services to complete a real estate transaction. The only thing lacking is fiduciary duties owed to their principal, but they're not owed because it's not a principal. When we talk about compensation, compensate them in full. All right. That being understood, whoops, let me take this back up here. Designated agency. I'll shrink this just slightly. Designated agency. We are a designated agency company. All of our companies under HRC are designated companies. Now, what you need to know is simply this. You are Coldwell Banker Professionals. That's the key. That is our designated agency company. Anything that within Coldwell Banker Professionals, we need to know that that's a situation. So let's go ahead and read this one all the way through here first. A buyer or seller with a designated agency agreement, which we would have within our company, is represented only by the agents specifically named in the agreement, in the agreement. So guys, what are they talking about when we hit the agreement? Well, is it an exclusive right to represent, an exclusive right to sell? Is it the listing or the buyer? The contract that we sign with that buyer or seller. Any agents of the firm not named in the agreement do not represent the buyer or seller. Again, let me read that. Any agents of the firm not named in the agreement do not represent the buyer or the seller. Therefore, you are the only one. The named designated agent acts solely on behalf of his or her client and may only share confidential information about the client with the agent's supervisory broker, who is also named in that contract, that agreement. Other agents in the firm have no duties to the buyer or seller and may act solely on behalf of another party within that transaction. So guys, again, that's the beauty of designated agency. You get to represent one party. Doesn't matter what anybody else in the firm does. The only other individual that may have a dual agency before you would be the supervisory broker. And all of this is taken care of between all of our agreements. It is agreed to in advance. When the purchase agreement is written, it actually will disclose whether or not we have an in-house transaction. You'll learn about that if you have not already. That will disclose that we have a consensual dual agency for the supervisory broker. And we know that when you have the buyer and the seller, you have a dual agency, and your responsibility is simply to say, hey, buyer, seller, I now represent both of you to this transaction. I am a dual agency. It's called redisclosure because of the change. So guys, here's all we do now. This becomes simple. You're a seller's agent. You're a buyer's agent. You're a dual agent. And in rare cases, you may become a transaction coordinator. Normally, it's seller's agent or buyer's agent. Occasionally, you're going to redisclose. You'll use dual agent. And all you have to do is redisclose. There's no need to get an agreement to do so because those agreements have already been done, stating that we will just simply redisclose. So that's a key part for you, if you will. Let's keep that simple. Now, what you should always have checked is that we are a designated agency. Never will anything else other than this one be checked. Never, zero, nada. I'll shift, always checked. Matter of fact, most of the time you're going to see that that is default check. You would probably have to uncheck it. Here we are going to put the agents' names who are the designated agents. So if it's you, it's you. If you work with a co-list, co-sale, you have a team, then the two of you would be both signed in on that one. So guys, down here, this is the nice part. It's saying this is a disclosure, but note that this is not a contract. Would you, by simply completing this and doing your proper disclosure, create an agency relationship? If I said to the buyer, look, I'm going to check here, I am a buyer's agent, I am your agent. I now have an implied relationship with that buyer. So what I'm doing now is, this is not a contract must immediately follow. Or I got the contract signed with the disclosure to come with it. But these two go coordinated. Don't have one without the other. It then says the undersigned does or does not have an agency relationship with any other real estate licensee. Ask, seller, do you have a relationship with anybody else? Have you signed or are you working with anyone else? No. Well, that's easy. Does not. And that will be most of the time. I'll give you a scenario where it may be. I'm working with a buyer. In this case, this would be a buyer. I ask them, do you have a relationship with any other agent anywhere? They say, well, yeah, gee, you remember, Darwin, we're down here to buy, but we have an agent in Cadillac who's got the house on the market. Well, that's a yes, I do, but it's represented them, or I'm being represented as a seller. So all we're doing, guys, is trying to avoid committing the buyer or the seller to pay two commissions. Contractually, that's what it could be. We're asking up front so that that does not happen. Now, in simplest, all they do, the buyer or the seller signs. And we've now completed our our disclosure for agency relationships. So there's another one. You know what to do. Go talk to people, because that's the only way you're ever going to have to worry about getting these things signed. Have a great one.